Through the power of voodoo and black magic, I hath returned from the dead. Now for a quick synopsis of the prior two videos about romance in games. I am an idiot. Now, when it comes down to it, when it comes especially to romance video games, the first game that probably needs to be talked about is the one that probably pops into most people's heads. For a good reason. Mass Effect. Now, Mass Effect, while not always necessarily nailing the flirting and the gaining of interest when it comes down to romance, I'll give it its credit that it more than deserves. It excels at the intimacy and does a pretty good job at stuff like confessions. It does a good job. Although, like I said, it doesn't necessarily nail the earlier parts of a romance. When it comes down to it, it's more fantasy brethren, that of Dragon Age, does much similar to it when it comes down to its confessing and its intimacy being its strongest points. But at the same time, I will give it its credit. It does do a slightly better job at the more early phases of romance. Stuff like gaining someone's interest via realizing you have tons of similarities and gifts and so on. When it comes down to it, I do feel like those games, Dragon Age does do a little bit better of a job. Now, with that being said, kind of in both games, you can really not do jack squat. You can barely, if at all, interact with characters and still trigger the romance pretty easily. You don't really have to do much, which kind of sucks. Another game set that does have to be brought up, in my opinion, is that of Persona and Agarest War. Now, Persona and Agarest War, despite sharing some similarities in the way that their romances are handled and where their focus is, for example, on stuff like flirting and gaining someone's interest, and one of them being pretty good at dating and stuff, I will point out, though, that they don't really do all that great of a job on the long run. When it comes down to it, in both Persona and Agarest War, the events, stuff like intimacy, as well as, funnily enough, for one of them, which I love the irony of it, even stuff like marriage and family and all that other stuff, they don't do a great job at that. Persona doesn't even try to attempt to touch on the later aspects. It doesn't have, like, at the end of it, segments where you're, grown up and dealing with, freaking marriage or kids or anything like that. No, you don't have anything like that in Persona, which might I add is a little weird. Just a little weird. It's kind of an odd thing that they don't try and do, like, where are they now thing at the end of the games or something like that. I'm not complaining per se, because I personally like the earlier parts of a romance and overlooking the later parts more than overlooking the early parts and jumping into the later parts of a romance. So, yeah. When it comes down to it, the next game I want to talk about, this one, to me, is one of the few games off the top of my head that I think can go up against Persona when it comes to its romance and the quality of those romances, and actually hold its own. It's the only game franchise off the top of my head that can really do it, and that is Trails of Cold Steel. Now, Trails of Cold Steel, the overall likability of the romances changes depending on which one we talk about. For me, the best romances are arguably Trails of Cold Steel 2 and Cold Steel 4, with Cold Steel 1 coming in at third, and then in dead last, Cold Steel 3. In case you're curious on the why, the reason why Cold Steel 3 is at the bottom of it is because they decided, for some reason... Who thought of that idea? I'd love to know who thought of that idea. Oh well, maybe a different question for a different day, I suppose. When it comes down to it, Cold Steel 3 decided to do this hard reset of everything. It's like the first two games never happened. Ever. That's the way it gets handled. And I definitely don't like it. And I definitely don't like the impact it has on it all. It kind of just makes you stop, raise your eyebrow, and wonder, what's the point of this reset that doesn't really benefit you truly? that just instead raises tons of questions and kind of actually hurts the overall relations of the characters for some reason. Why? I have to assume that it's just an oversight or just a mistake. I have to assume. But it's, to me, a costly mistake. It is a mistake that makes no sense, and the alteration of this doesn't really affect it in any positive way to me at all. It's just kind of this giant eyesore for that game. Is that, okay, great, all my romances meant nothing in the first 2 games. So why should I now ever do them again? Why should I go into these romances? Why should I aim for my favorite character if I know it's just all going to be rendered null and void in those first 2 games? It kind of sucks. It's not a smart decision. Now, when it comes down to it, and this is something that I feel like that decision kind of just hammered home more instead of retracting from, is that when it comes to the potential of romance in video games, we're nowhere near the heights of what it could be, or what it even should have been by now. We're nowhere near. When it comes down to it, there's a long way to go still. Especially when you consider the fact that the potential, in truth, for romance video games is pretty much limitless. The room to improve is limitless, pretty much. At the end of the day, the words that often pop into my head is, if you're going to do something, lean into it fully. I think what needs to be done, in all honesty, is that both developers and those who love romance and games, I think all of us need to start taking notes on what's working and what isn't. Hopefully, in time, with enough of these notes jotted down, enough time, and enough examples of what to do and what not to do, maybe eventually, someday, we're gonna get that one game that does such an amazing job at moving us with these moments, with latching us on to these characters, and feeling like the romance we chose was worth its weight in gold. Now, how long that's gonna take, I wish I knew. In reality, for now, we really don't have that game that shows that they put all their chips in. For now, what we keep getting is half-baked attempts, or ideas that are cool on paper, sound like they should work on paper, but don't get executed properly. More often than not, what we get is a meh experience with tons of wasted time and effort. I keep hoping, and I'm going to choose to keep believing beyond a shadow of doubt, that one day we're gonna get that game. That one romance that's bar none the best in gaming. We're gonna get it someday. One of these days, we're going to get the romance game that was always possible. The real question we have to ask is how long. But at the end of the day, that's what I believe. That there's still room for better romance in games. That there's still room for amazing romances, stories yet untold, and who knows what, or even when. Who knows who's going to be the first developer to take romance to the heights it should have been by now. But what I believe, beyond doubt, is that it will happen one day. Hopefully you all either found this interesting, laughed at me, laughed with me, or hell, some mixture of the above. Hopefully maybe at least made you smirk. Especially with my opening idiocy at the start. This has been Game and King. And thank you all for being so patient with how long this effing took. This took too long. See you all next time. Well, made the recording, but why in the bloody hell do I look like a Smurf reject? Oh lordy. So I hope you all will forgive me for this, but everything's gotta be in black and white. I don't want to look like a Smurf reject. And it doesn't help that this same issue is happening for both the software I'm using now and another software a friend of mine suggested. I look like a Smurf no matter which one. I'm looking at myself now and it is... wow. So a lot of my videos are going to be in black and white until I can figure out the issue of why I look like a Smurf. And not even a good Smurf. No, I look like the discount fugly version of a Smurf. Oh boy. Oh, hopefully I can fix this issue before the next video I do. I hope. I really hope. Like I said, sorry for the look of it. I hope I have it fixed sooner rather than later. I hope. Wish me luck.